Hello, and welcome to the mentorDINO YouTube channel. I'm your host, Caitlin Rozier. I am an architect and founder of mentorDINO. Each week, I interview amazing professionals in and around the architecture, engineering, and construction industry to help foster learning, growth, and inspiration in others. Thank you all to our current subscribers, and if you're new, we'd love to have you join our community. So hit subscribe. It really does help others be able to discover this resource. So let's dive in. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to the mentorDINO podcast. I would like to welcome Beresford Pratt, Senior Design Manager of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Thank you, Beresford, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thanks for having me, Caitlin.
So let's start out with the loaded question. Tell my listeners a little bit about your journey so far as an architect. Where'd you go to school, and what's your career journey been like so far?
Yeah, sure. I think I found architecture somewhere in between middle school and high school. Lots of exploration through different programs that I had experienced when I moved from the state of Maryland to Minnesota. So a lot of tech ed programs brought me through a very convoluted path, but it showed me a path through architecture, which I pursued in college. I graduated at Penn State University in 2014 with a B.Arch, and I started working in private practice. Previous firm was mostly focusing on higher education, and education was always kind of a passion of mine. So most of the designs that I worked on were mostly on college campuses. So anything from academic buildings to dining halls, research buildings, and so forth. And then I got licensed in, I believe, 2018. And I had to fill the void with all this extra free time after getting licensed.
Yeah.
So I essentially started picking up a lot of volunteer opportunities through nonprofits, through AIA, of course, NOMA, United Way, joining a few other organizations. And then during the pandemic, I made a pivot, a huge pivot, moving from private sector to public sector, which was a whole nother beast. And along that way, I started also teaching, adjuncting at a local university, Morgan State University. And so my path has been a very, I'll say, unconventional path, but it's been a fun journey along the way. And something I very much advocate for all my students to take a risk and try different opportunities.
Yeah. So what was the cause for the big pivot?
Yeah. Okay. So I had been doing private practice for about 8 years. And when you're in school, a lot of times academic professors really encourage traditional practice. A lot of it has to do with their exposure and what they're familiar with. And a lot of it has to do with the vast majority of people who pursue architecture. That's usually where they end up, in some kind of traditional practice. So I just don't think I got a lot of exposure in terms of all the other outlets that you can kind of take. Interestingly enough, I would say most of the people I graduated with, we all went to traditional practices, but there were a few that kind of took very unique paths very early on. Like one might have jumped into working with Amazon and doing more on the store design and maybe some digital coding and things of that nature. And then one might have gone into Disney working as an Imagineer. So I saw different avenues, but it wasn't still clear to me. And something happened during the pandemic where I was just like, I love architecture, but I feel like there are way more opportunities out there that I need to explore. And I just want to take that leap. So I had a mentor. He doesn't like me calling him a mentor, but he ended up making that leap maybe about 3 or 4 years before I did. And he loved his experience. He had an opportunity to go to Japan, and he moved back to DC, and he was working at headquarters of another agency. And I talked to him about it, and he said, hey, I think you might enjoy it. And I know you'd be a good fit. So just try it out.
Yeah.
If you don't like it, you can always go back.
So he definitely guided you in that path. Was there anything that really sparked your interest on it that he mentioned to what you do now versus what you were doing?
Yeah, so he probably would also hate the idea that he guided me. He'd probably say, like, I didn't guide you, but you had curiosity and answered questions. But I would say, so there were probably a few components. One of it was I got a little burnt out. I'll just be honest. I got a little burnt out in the traditional practice, and I was looking for an opportunity to find a different pace, one, and then also find kind of a slightly different role than what I was doing. So when I jumped into private practice, I believe I was hired, and mostly what I did for when I was initially hired was for my design skill set. And so most of my first like 2 years or so, I was just heavy design, lots of design drawings, modeling, renderings, animation, model building, all that jazz. And I really loved that. But I also realized I needed to be a well-rounded architect. So I really had to ask and push to see if I can get more on the technical side. So knew how to draw and build
How the
buildings.
beautiful designs come together into
Exactly.
reality.
Exactly. Like I didn't want to just be a paper architect, which is what it came down to. And that also helped kind of spearhead me getting my license and all the exposure I needed. And so I had gone through this back and forth between doing the creative side, the technical side, back to creative side, and back to technical side. And I was like, okay, I've gotten a lot of exposure here. But something that I'm kind of missing is much more management,
Mm-hmm.
one, and then two, much more exposure with clients on a day-to-day basis. I did get exposure to my clients. I did speak in meetings. I did coordinate meetings, but it wasn't the bulk of what I was doing. And I started to realize that there were opportunities I was missing in developing my softer skills. And so that's something that I thought was going to be extremely valuable. So I took an opportunity in design management, which would essentially force me to do
To
a lot
manage.
more management and communication and leadership development.
So in the design management role, it's more because it kind of has both words in it,
Yeah.
design and management. So you're really doing a lot more of the management side of assuming projects, working with the clients up front then.
Yeah. So I will say my role now, I don't draw anymore from a day to day basis, which at first was a little bit of a shock for me, but it was something I knew that I was going to get into. So I kind of supplement that a little bit with teaching, which is great because then I get to balance both of those skill sets out. But design management, essentially, I'm an owner's rep for a particular agency. Right now, I happen to be with the Department of Defense, but essentially, various agencies will come to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and say, "Hey, we want this building done. We just don't have the resources to one hire an architecture engineering firm, or have an in-house group of architects and engineers design this for us. We need your expertise." And so, for all intents and purposes, I am the project manager for the design team. So I'll contract AE firms or we'll work with in-house architects and engineers. We'll design the customer's building and then we'll take it to construction and then we'll turn over the keys to them.
Nice. And how many projects are you working on at any one time?
So it really depends on the size of the project.
Mm-hmm.
So like I may have a project that's a couple $100 million, and then I may have another project that's like a couple $1 million. And so the smaller the project is, the more likely you are to have more. So I would say I usually juggle anywhere from 3 to 6. So right now on my plate, I think I have 5.
And then you mentioned about being an adjunct professor. How did you get involved with Morgan State and what courses are you teaching?
I've always been connected to Morgan State when I first moved to Baltimore City. So a lot of that had to do through working with students in maybe like portfolio review sessions or joining jury reviews at the end of a semester. Been connected with some professors over the years, and they just kind of developed like this long list of folks who they like to tap when the semester's wrapping up to have come in and just look at their students' projects. And I remember myself sitting at a Be More NOMA event, which is our local chapter for NOMA. And I was talking to one of the interim department heads. And I was just talking about my opportunities with my new career. And I said, I always had an interest in teaching. I almost went to grad school because I wanted to teach. And I said, but I don't necessarily have my master's set up yet. I am licensed, but I feel like I have to go back to school to get that opportunity. And she's like, oh, well, wait a minute there. I think we may have an opportunity for you because we're always looking for professionals to kind of teach. We want that balance between academia and professional skill sets. And so the opportunity opened up so I could teach actually a lot of courses, but I ended up choosing a very specific course, both so I can manage my workload, but also passions of mine that I've had in school. So right now, I'm teaching digital fabrication, which is mostly teaching students how to utilize programs like Rhino, Illustrator, and other 3D modeling programs. And then, of course, using their Bear Lab, which has a laser cutter, 3D printer, and CNC router. And so my most recent project that I had my students do was they were designing their own desk lamps, which was a fun way to kind of stretch their design thinking skills because they're so used to thinking big and like
Yeah.
building scale. And I wanted them to be more detailed and refined. And so ultimately my path to teach at Morgan, and I think most of my career choices has been through some networking opportunities. I've talked to somebody and something showed up.
Yeah, and it's very different than your day job too. Like very different. And really cool that they were doing lamps. Like I know I didn't get down to that level. So it was always building. So it's a breath of fresh air that they're learning mechanics and what they're doing.
I will say I had an opportunity to also teach our design build studio. So they got to do something a little bigger in scale with a tool shed for a local urban garden, which was also a fun project as well.
So in that one, they're designing it and then physically building it at the same time.
Yeah. So I guess both courses are exactly that. They design it and then physically build it. It's just the scale changes.
Yeah, and then you mentioned it a little bit, but how are you balancing working and being an adjunct professor?
Yeah. So one of the big benefits of my career shift is there's a policy in place for flex work hours. And I know a lot of firms have this as well. But that opportunity essentially allows me to allocate certain times of the day where I may be offline and I may be doing something else. And I do have great leadership within my agency who has been extremely supportive of me utilizing flex hours and taking opportunities outside of the office. And I would say that everywhere I've worked, actually, they've had that sort of flexibility. I think the difference with my current position now is the work-life balance is a lot more manageable, so I can take on that adjunct position. Previously, I don't think I had that capacity just because my workload was really tight. Even though I had that flexible hours, I would still probably be up extremely late, many hours to kind of still achieve those milestones.
Yeah, and creating those designs, like it takes thinking time. And so
100%.
it's one thing, I guess more on the rep side, you kind of have your flow and what you're doing. Whereas when you're on the design side, you still have to come up with something. It doesn't just magically show itself. Here, you're going to do this. But you mentioned the Baltimore NOMA chapter. So you guys say Be More for your chapter. What are some fun things you're doing in the local Baltimore chapter?
Yeah. So this year or these last couple of years, we've had a lot of great events come into place. I think probably over the years, NOMA nationally has just really expanded. And so with that expansion, we've been seeing an influx of new members kind of joining, which is essentially adding more hands and feet to our events and helping support great events. So we've had everything from tours of great projects that are going on with like Black Women Build in Baltimore, which is a program that essentially sets a lot of women up for success in terms of fabricating and constructing a home that they can essentially buy at a very reasonable price and live in. And we've also done social events, obviously like paint and wine sipping. We've done lots of great tours of some historic sites, construction site tours. We have our professional development crew who's done things with ARE prep, as well as doing mentorship programs or panels for redevelopments that are happening in the city. So lots of events. We do monthly, what they call Hump Day Happy Hour, which is just an excuse to get together and kind of socialize. But I'm sure there's so many more that I could think of, but it's like the list is so long. But one of the most exciting things that's up and coming for us is going to be we're going to be hosting the NOMA National Conference here in Baltimore next year, and that was announced in Portland a few months ago at their national conference.
Oh, that's exciting. Now, is NOMA National leading that, or are they bringing in the Baltimore chapter to help organize it?
Yeah, both. So usually NOMA National, obviously pick the location. They do an RFP process, of course, but they have been always working with their local chapters. Of course, they have a national representative who supports the local chapters and leads a lot of certain coordination aspects, but the local chapter also needs to lead a lot of coordination aspects as well. So ultimately, it's like a collaboration between the two. So it's going to be an extremely exciting, very Baltimore.
Here is a NOMA question from my perspective. Who can join NOMA? Because I know from a male-female perspective in the industry, I am a minority, but I have found I like going to NOMA events, so I can I be the minority because there's not usually that many white people that show up to a NOMA event, especially for the smaller ones. But what would you say for other people outside that may not think they're a minority? What do you find the benefits in bringing in other people to the organization?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess my first step would be probably to dispel the idea that you need to be a minority to be a part of the organization. Actually, it's even more beneficial for those who don't identify as being a minority to participate, because the conversations that are happening in those spaces are phenomenal, so that you can actually absorb them and maybe even implement some of those ideas in your either place of business or in your daily life. So I would start by saying that the National Organization of Minority Architects is not race or gender specific, but it's a whole organization that advocates for anybody who identifies as a minority. Of course, there are subsets within NOMA that, of course, there are initiatives and programs that are advocating for those particular demographics, because we know the challenges there are with only 2% or maybe slightly more of licensed architects being African American or Black. And with women architects, that number is substantially more, but it's still not anywhere near the percentage of male licensed architects. So like there's so many different levers, I guess, of improvement that we can pull. And so I would say that anybody who believes in change should be a part of that organization. But specific to your question, if you identify as somebody who you don't see yourself as a minority, I think you should come. I think you should also be a member, because I think the way real change usually happens is through coalition and allyship. So everyone should be a part.
Yeah, definitely. I know I try to go to the ones I can. It's like when there's so many great organizations, it's like, okay, pick and choose. But the NOMA one's the one that I'm learning so much about myself and others in that one. And that's what I love about the NOMA organization. Moving on to something else. I know you mentioned you volunteer for the Board of Baltimore Design School. What is happening over there? I know absolutely nothing about the Baltimore Design School. So what is it? What are you doing? And what's going on over there?
Yeah, so the Baltimore Design School is a very, very unique school in the city of Baltimore. It's a school that started many years ago. It's got to be at least over a decade now, with a previous mayor that really wanted to have a fashion school. And just interesting enough.
I did not look up anything ahead of time because I purposely wanted to just be.
It's completely okay. So Baltimore has a very strong historic art school here, and it's kind of paved the way for some pretty amazing artists that have kind of made their way, including Tupac Shakur and Jada Pinkett Smith. But that school is very specific to certain types of arts. And so there was kind of a certain level of arts that was kind of missing within the city. And so when that idea of a fashion school came up, a few people also thought of the idea of including architecture and graphic design in that school as well. So this school is a 6 through 12 school. So middle school and high school students participate. The 6th to 8th graders, it's part of their core curriculum is to have a drawing or creative aspect every day as part of their regular curriculum. And so they may be learning something in history or in English, but they also have a very creative project that's associated with that effort. And then from 9 through 12, the students get to pick a unique pathway, whether it's fashion design, architecture, or graphic design. And they get to do that for the next 3-4 years through their career, essentially focusing on that pathway. And the hope is a lot of those students will end up taking that on into higher education. And that gives you a leg up. Some of these programs have certifications that really set the students up for success. Some may even just go straight into owning their own business immediately after school. And we've heard about some taking vocational skills on, doing carpentry and things that may be a little bit more specific to a trade that they want to do, but maybe not in traditional white collar sense. And so essentially, the Baltimore Design School is a great niche school for creatives. It stretches your mind, and it's something that I got involved in through my previous firm, getting exposure through some colleagues. And then we started to do some shadow days at our office to bring students within our office so they can learn about the architectural industry. And the exposure, I think, was for the better for the students. I hope
Maybe.
it's for the better. Yeah.
I'm always worried I'm going to scare a student away whenever they come in to like shadow. I'm like, I know I do a lot, but it's fun, I swear.
Exactly. That's why I put that in air quotes, because I don't want to intimidate anybody, but it's like, it's such a large industry and it's like such a diverse industry. And so we try to squeeze so much in it, and I don't want to overwhelm anybody. But ultimately, my exposure to the Baltimore Design School led me to kind of join the board, and been on there for maybe 4 years now. And it's been a great experience. I would say the most recent event I attended was something called, or a program that allows students to essentially opt into certain schools within the city through an application process. And it's essentially like a school fair or a career fair that the city goes through a slightly different process in terms of how students enter schools. And so just kind of meeting all the students within the city, not just within the region of the Baltimore Design School, really exposed me to how much students really crave creative environments and create educational spaces that stretch their creativity. I guess the traditional educational model, which I constantly look at, it's just not ideal for many thinkers.
Yeah, I know even for myself going through and like trying to find time in curriculum to pick electives to do something fun, there wasn't much time for it. The second you had your regular items, you couldn't like shift year to year. It was more consistent. And I took drafting classes all through high school. And my senior year, I had to, it's like the timing messed up with music. And so I couldn't do music and drafting, but I knew I wanted to go into architecture school. So I was like, I'm not skipping drafting and I'm not skipping music. And I had to create my own course and shift it so I could put it at a different time and get like teacher approval to do my own like work study. It's probably what they called it, but it was so limiting to what you could choose and do. I would have loved to do more arts. So now go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's fascinating, because that's literally my similar situation, in the sense that like I took a lot of these creative courses, but I kind of ran out of opportunities. And so I had to create my own work study too. And essentially it was like teaching me how to do digital drafting. So it was just mostly CAD and BIM programs. But that passion, I guess, if you don't have a faculty member to nurture that, you don't know how far you can take it. And that exposure may stop, that lack of exposure may stop you from pursuing something that could be very worthwhile.
Yeah, and not wanting to give up other fun things you're doing.
Yeah.
Now, do students have to apply for these different levels? It sounds very similar. Our public school for the city of Pittsburgh, they have separate, I always thought it was more high school, but talking to some coworkers that have students going through it, sounds like the middle school age on like the design school, but it's like their daughter needed a portfolio to get into this school and then shift up for these classes. Do the students have to do that too within the design school?
Yeah, so it's partially the city. So take it with a grain of salt, because I don't know the full details of how everything works, but students across the city can apply to various schools. So it's not necessarily like you're in this region, in this neighborhood, you only have to go to this school. And so the Baltimore Design School is one of those top tier schools that's consistently in the top 5 schools in the city. And so it naturally will have more competition with people interested in applying. And so from 6 through 8, essentially, they're just trying to find students who are really excited about being creative every day as part of their core curriculum. And so the threshold or the barrier to entry is more so like a personal question. Like, do you really want to do this? And if you do, obviously, if you meet the requirements, you get accepted. Of course, there's a limited number of seats because it's a pathway. If you're joining the school, later in the game, or I think even when you're going from 6 to 8, the transition from 8 to 9, there's a portfolio that needs to be submitted. And they have workshops and open houses to get the students and parents prepared. So, like, there's a lot of avenues to set you up for success so that you can get accepted. The intent is not to stop students from coming, but really to get them excited and put their best foot forward.
Yeah. I know I was more freaked out when I heard it because I was in one of those school districts where it's all right, you live here, this is the school you go to, unless
Yeah.
you want to go pay for private.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh my gosh, having a portfolio in like middle school? Like I was
Right.
freaking out trying to create a college portfolio
Yeah,
to like
right. Right.
apply for undergrad. Now you're also, because you're done with the AREs, so you are all over the place with local organizations. Serving on the Emerging Leaders Council with United Way Central Maryland. What
Mm.
are you doing over there and serving on the council?
Yeah, so I will say that my tenure has wrapped up a few years ago with United Way, but it was a great opportunity that I served on for the council. I think I served for about 4 years, but I was plugged into United Way for about 6 to 7. And it was really an awesome opportunity. And I'll say the same is true for AIA, an awesome opportunity to stretch my leadership skills. So it's a philanthropic organization that really supports families in need within the central Maryland region. And so a lot of the focus was around Baltimore, for me at least, with programs focusing on housing, education, and I believe job training and career development, things of that nature. Some of the core pillars to essentially make a stable life and a stable household. And so that council really helped expose me to a lot of other emerging professionals within the area. So it was a great networking opportunity. I'll start there with non-architects, because architects love to hang out with other architects. And so I get
Yep.
to meet lawyers, financial execs, folks that work at Hopkins, somebody who works in the food industry. Like, it's just very different exposure of folks. So it's great to get that exposure. But the big thing was, like, we all really, at the time that we all participated, we all really care about helping and building the city up. And so it was a great way to participate in volunteer opportunities and even design, coordinate, and lead volunteer opportunities, where it may be at a local school where we hold like a student fair, like an actual in the community, or having like a Christmas village where we give out presents, fun ways to kind of give back, but also to get together and just meet everyone that we kind of live and work with.
Yeah, and I think the important part is being around non-architects. We do all like staying together as like a herd almost, but gets you outside and gets you talking about architecture to non-architects, which I don't think people get enough practice doing. And then they struggle when they talk to users that can't read a floor plan, that don't understand what an architect even does.
Right.
Have those conversations helped you in terms of advocating for yourself?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'd say absolutely. Like, I start to realize that, like, there are so many extremely intelligent people in this world, but like many of us architects, many creatives in general, like, we just see and may communicate things slightly different. We tend to be very visual creatures. So we might be able to look at an empty patch of land or a blank sheet of paper and see all these ideas come forth, and like learning how to communicate those ideas to somebody who doesn't think or see like you really forces you to be an expert at language,
Mm-hmm.
an expert at reading nonverbals, and whether or not somebody is truly understanding what you're saying, or if you can try to find a new way to articulate your idea or your thought. And I find that now more and more in my everyday career, is that sometimes my customers and my clients, they're just not familiar with every single aspect of building design, construction, and so forth. So it stretches you in terms of how you communicate. But I think a big thing too that really helped me was just being able to talk about architecture in general. Lots of folks, when you say you're an architect, the first thing they say is, "Oh, you can build my house." Oh, you're
Yep.
like Ted Mosby. Like, and you're like, "Look, okay." There's so much more to architecture than that. Like, sometimes architects are great facilitators of community meetings. Sometimes they're great advocates for larger urban planning ideas. And so trying to explain that architecture is not confined to this particular building typology or this character you saw on a daily show, like trying to expand their idea of what architects can do. That's also a fun aspect of meeting people who don't engage with architects regularly.
Yeah, and just bringing up the knowledge base because
Hmm.
I feel the more people know what an architect can do, the more I think people would appreciate what architects do rather than just, hey, go build my house for me, which those are fine too. We do
Right,
have
right.
residential architects, and hey, if I've got a friend wanting to build a house, I'll go help them out. So it's a fun little design exercise.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just want to say this out loud. If you are looking to build a house, I'm not opposed to building your house or designing your house. I
It's
love that
just the
stuff.
question we always get.
Yeah.
Then the last organization, which is really how we met, was
Mhm.
through AIA and YAF. With you were the communications director at the time, which then means you more run the YAF Connection magazine. That's as far as I got because I'm usually just a contributor on and off to the magazine. But can you let everybody know what you have been doing with YAF, what it meant to be on like the local versus national side of like
Mhm.
AIA and YAF?
Yeah, yeah. So my exposure with AIA was actually kind of limited. So in college, I had more exposure with NOMA. I would attend conferences. I was a NOMA student. I knew of AIS. I attended some of their events, but I wasn't as plugged in. They just happened to be a much larger entity, and so I felt like they had all the all the needs that they had were kind of met. And so NOMA was something that I was like, okay, I think I want to really support and build this one up more so. So it actually gave me a little bit more opportunity um, in terms of my development. But when I graduated, I really wanted to get licensed, and so I tried to bang that out within 3 years. And so from 2014 to the end of 2017, I managed to finish my licensing exams and my AREs and my hours, and I just didn't know what to do with my free time after that. So I started to poke my head into the local chapter of AIA a little bit more, and I loved my experience there. I was with the Emerging Professionals organization, and so a lot of what I was doing there was just kind of supporting for certain events and people who wanted to get prepared for the AREs, but I had already kind of finished that stage in my life. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought it was very valuable to support that. But I wanted to ask the question of like, okay, well, how do we support young architects now? There's this huge gap between once you're licensed and then like becoming a firm principal or
Yeah. There's a big
FAIA.
there's a big now what? What else
Exactly.
can I do? So,
Exactly. Exactly.
but
And
anyway, you
so
started poking.
yeah, I started poking, and it was exactly those questions like, what are my new goals now? And so I had to start developing a plan to kind of develop myself. And essentially, I was at one of these local AIA emerging professional meetings, and for Baltimore, and I had this opportunity that came up through a call from somebody who was on essentially the AIA National Young Architects Forum, and he was saying, "Hey, I'm currently the regional director for the Mid Atlantic, which includes Maryland, DC, and Delaware. And my term is ending, but we need young architects, especially those who are recently licensed, but also who come from diverse backgrounds to kind of shake things up within our organization or ask new questions. We need those folks to kind of apply and consider joining this national position and advocate for young architects within your region." And I was like, okay, this seems like something interesting. Maybe I should consider it. One of the benefits of being in the Young Architects Forum was that hopefully your region, kind of supported you to attend conferences and also travel to meet your other components or chapters within the region, so you get exposure to other emerging professionals. And so I was like, oh man, the benefits are too good. I can't like not say
Mm-hmm.
yes. Like this is already something that I wanted to do, and like if I don't commit to this now, I don't think I will ever do this again. So I jumped into it, and it was way more than I expected, but in a good way. It was just I started to realize very quickly that AI is you get what you put into it, and the more I got involved, the more I wanted to put into it, and so it's very easy to realize very quickly that like there's so many opportunities, and you can be overwhelmed with the opportunities. So you just have to be very selective with your time, of
Yeah.
course. But I did the regional director for about 2 years.
So it's a
And
2-year
then
term?
2 year terms, yep.
Okay.
So all the regional directors, well, now they're state directors because we moved from regions to states in AI, are 2 year terms. And then what they call advisory committee or ADCOM, which is, I believe it's 5 directors, the chair, and then the vice chair. They have essentially, or excuse me, is it 5 chairs? 4 chairs. Sorry.
I
They
won't
essentially,
go cross-check to make sure you're right or wrong.
yeah. No, I'm mixing up because it's like election cycles. I think there's 3 elections one year, 2 elections the other year. So, but one of them is for the chair. But essentially, it's 2 years for those as well. And so the communication chair opened, and I had been working on the communications team for a year. And so I took that on, and I started working as the editor in chief for Connection, which is the young architect publication that is designed for us, written by us, but also definitely incorporates a lot of outside voices that are not necessarily in that young architect demographic, but we really value their thoughts. So I did that for 2 years, and man, that was some of the best times. Just kind of hearing diverse perspectives, and actually kind of facilitated part of my career jump too, hearing about alternate career paths, writing about folks who took alternate career paths and listening to them. It was eye-opening.
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons I started this podcast, was to just help people figure out different paths, opportunities, whether it's engineering, construction, architecture, design. There's so many different paths to take.
Yeah.
And I don't think we talk enough about it. Or even if somebody leaves architecture, I wouldn't mind having more architects in different industries to shake up other industries. So I don't really find it a bad thing either if people even leave the industry to align with some of their own passions. But
yeah, absolutely.
so what did you do after communications director? Have you calmed down within the AIA?
Yes, actually, I did. I had to, because at one point I think I was volunteering regularly for about 4 organizations, and that include being on a council or board or whatever the case was. And I was just like, I have no time for myself, so I need to pull back. I'm somebody who loves to play soccer, somebody who likes to also just do random social events on the side. So it's like I just needed to have a balance between the volunteering, my day-to-day job, and then also my social life. And so I pulled back for actually a few years, a year and a half. But recently a new opportunity came up with one of the previous chairs of YAF. She started working with the College of Fellows and developing their quarterly newsletter. And she just recently moved up to like the editor, the lead editor for that. And she remembered my work and connection, and we had a good working relationship in YAF. And so she's like, hey, you should check this out. And I took a look at the opportunity. I was like, all right, I'm going to get back into AI again. So I'm going to support the College of Fellows in their quarterly newsletters for
So
next year.
what goes out in the fellow newsletters?
Yeah, it's published on Issue, and it's very public, so anybody can take a look. But just like Connection, also very public. But it includes announcements for new fellows who kind of come into the fold. So celebrating them, talking a little bit about them and their achievements. But it also talks about fellow things that are happening with fellows across the nation. Like what's the great works that they're doing, projects, programs, things of that nature. Not too much unlike Connection in the sense that like this one's geared a little bit more towards fellows and all the great work they're doing across the nation. But great thing about the College of Fellows is that they definitely want to incorporate other voices. So every once in a while they'll pull an article from the Young Architects Forum, or they'll pull people from the Young Architects Forum to write for them in the newsletter as well. So yeah, the publication is a diverse array of things. Also, they have some scholarships and programs like that. So they have advertisements that they also want to advocate for. So there's lots of things that go into this letter.
No, and that's a lot of fun. I'll have to look them up because I know I keep up with Connection, even if I can't contribute all the time. I'm always not
Yeah.
enough. But I know you mentioned early on that you got really burned out before you pivoted. And I know it sounded like you pulled back from other organizations. Do you have other tips for if anybody's burnout and need to readjust, or anything that worked for you in particular? Everybody's burnout's a little bit different.
Yeah. So I guess my burnout came more so from a recognition that like I was doing a lot very fast in a short amount of time. But then also at that particular time, something that I loved and was a passion of mine stopped feeling like something I loved and was a passion. Not everything is peaches and roses, so it's not always going to feel great.
Yeah.
But if you start to lose the luster, um, for me, I had to take a pause. I didn't want to lose it altogether. And so I didn't want to have a sour taste in my mouth about the architecture industry. So I wanted to take another path that still kept me adjacent and allied to it and still within it, but through a different lens.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the things that I really was passionate about, design and architecture, I could do on the side. And it could
As
still,
the professor.
exactly, as the
Yeah.
professor,
Building
or
lamps.
maybe, yeah, building lamps, or maybe even taking up a small project for a friend or family member or acquaintance that wants to do a renovation to their home. Things like that, where it's not my day-to-day job, but it's something that still allows me to stretch my creativity and still stretch my design skills. It's a good balance for me. So um, I would recommend to somebody who's dealing with burnout is maybe just take a pause for a second, a mental pause. I don't
Yeah.
mean like leave your job immediately, quit
Quit your
everything.
job, quit
Yeah, yeah,
everything,
not,
go
not
hide in a
advocating for
rock.
that. Yeah, unless you are in a fantastic financial situation where you can just drop everything, go for it. But I recommend taking a mental pause and just asking the tough questions of like, okay, if it's tough now, what can I do to either change that? And that may mean shifting organizations. It may mean shifting roles, or it may mean leaving the industry altogether. But taking a mental pause and talking and developing mentors is probably a good way, a good starting place for sure.
Yeah, because just because you're burnout doesn't mean you have to leave the industry. A lot
Right.
of people feel they have to quit their firm.
Right.
I'm like, no, you
Right.
can change what you're working on in your
Right.
role.
Yeah.
And I feel most firm leaders now get it. And if they're not getting it, then maybe, yeah, it's time to move on to a different firm. But yeah, touching back on the AIA, I know I tend to get a lot of questions from recent grads. What is it for them to why they should join the AIA? They've got mounds of debt. They've got the AREs they're starting to figure out, which is also costly between the actual exams and studying. And not all firms help support paying for an organization. And I know for Pittsburgh, my dues are over $1,000.
Yeah.
But again, you mentioned you get what you put into it. So, what advice do you give to those recent grads?
Yeah. Well, for starters, for recent grads, if you're joining the AIA and you've not been a member as a professional, of course, AIS, I'm sure that's a different boat. I believe they cover your first year.
Yeah,
So,
if you
um,
apply within X number of days or months since graduation.
you should first get that exposure with that free membership. Jump into it and see what AI is about. One big thing I will say is that once you get into AIA, don't just sign up and attend one event or two. Go to a diverse array of events. There's usually a different, essentially, club, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a different committee for various aspects of AIA, whether you're focused on building typologies, you like education spaces, or you really want to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, or you really want to advocate for some particular local program you're having. For example, Baltimore had the Future Architect program, which was supporting K through 12 schools, essentially adopting a school. Like there's so many different avenues within the AIA, both locally, regionally, and nationally. And get involved, meet as many folks as you can. Um, and I think that might be the starting place for you seeing AIA's worth, because it's really, AIA as an organization is phenomenal. It's huge and robust, but it's really the people
Mm-hmm.
that make it valuable. And some of those opportunities, that may come up in your life, whether it's career opportunities or just exposure and professional development, those usually come from the networks you develop. And I think AIA is essentially the premier network for architects just because of its sheer number. And I think NOMA is extremely powerful as well. But AIA is just massive. So I think you you've got to just at least try it a little bit. And I say the same thing for NOMA. Like, people should absolutely join NOMA because for me, NOMA is like, AI is massive, but NOMA is like family. Like,
Yeah.
it's a little bit more intimate. So the connections you build in NOMA are almost like family like. And AI, you will get those connections too, but it's just the scale changes
Yeah.
the way organizations operate.
And that description holds true in other cities.
Mm-hmm.
When I go to AIA Pittsburgh events versus AIA NOMA events, AIA Pittsburgh, yeah, a good chunk of people know each other, and it's depending on how active you are, depends on how many people you know. When I go to NOMA events, I feel like I'm witnessing a family. Like, people aren't just catching up on what projects you're working on, what cool things you're doing. It's like, hey, how's your family today? Like, hey, I know you were struggling last month.
Yeah.
How's everything going? The conversations are very different. So that was a perfect description of those two organizations. And then I always end my discussions with one final question. And it is, what advice do you have for young professionals just starting their career?
So this is a tough one because everybody's different. And so the avenues and what you want to pursue in your life is so vast, and the opportunities are so vast. So I guess I'll touch on a little bit on something I said very early on, which is sometimes in academia, you may not be exposed to all the potential opportunities that are out there for you with your degree. Lots of times you go into a BS of architecture, Bachelor of Architecture, Master of Architecture, and you think the only path is through a traditional pathway. But the reality of it is there's so many industries out there that really value architects. And so my biggest advice would be get exposure to as many different avenues as possible. I don't necessarily mean go work for every single avenue. I mean talking to folks within these allied industry and talking about how they landed there, why they love their current position, where do they see themselves going, like just being curious and just talking to people on a regular basis. You'd be surprised how much it would open your eyes and your mind to avenues and opportunities. I don't think I would have considered public sector in my first 5 years of a career at all because I just really wasn't exposed to it. And for some reason, in my mind, it felt so removed from architecture that I was like, I don't want to jump into this because I feel like I went to school to be an architect, and then now I'm just doing other. But the reality of it is, it's been an invaluable experience because it really stretched certain creative skills that I didn't anticipate it stretching. And it also really stretched myself as a communicator, a manager, project leader, and just an overall person because I had to stretch different sides of me that I never really had to do on a daily basis. So I recommend to any young person graduating is asking lots of questions, especially about opportunities that may not necessarily always look like the traditional route.
And I'm like, well, you can get pitched.
No, that's a phenomenal point. Advocate for yourself at all times. I think it's very easy to hop into a career and then be so grateful that you have this opportunity, and you're like, okay, well, I don't want to do anything to screw this up. But the reality of it is, closed mouths don't get fed, and the squeaky wheel does, in fact, get the grease. So squeak a lot.
I like that. In Beresford, if there's a way somebody wants to get a hold of you, they loved our conversation and have questions, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can probably reach out to me through email. That's going to be beresford.pratt@gmail.com. So BERESFORD.PRATT@gmail.com. Yeah, I should be pretty accessible. If you don't get me the first time, just ping me again.
We all get busy schedules, so you never
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
But I'll leave your email in the show notes so anybody can get a hold of you or check out what you're going to be doing with the Fellows newsletter here in 2024. But thank you so much for joining me today. It was a fantastic conversation and so glad to meet you virtually since we mainly only met through emails and discussions that way before. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And for anybody who's listening to this, I definitely recommend checking out Connection and checking out Caitlin's articles. They're phenomenal.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Check out the description below for any resources, links, and contact information we discussed. Did you like the conversation today? Is there something you'd like to know more about or a topic I should cover? Leave me a comment below and I will see what I can do to best answer your questions. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. It does really help others be able to find this resource to have larger conversations. So leave me a comment and subscribe. I really appreciate your support.